Thank you very much, and thank you for hosting this, and thank you for coming along, everybody. It may not be the first time you have seen this presentation or a flavour of this presentation, but this one is fresh, new, put together for BSAC, and actually, as has been alluded to, it's been split into two. We have today, we have the application of photogrammetry on the Thistlegorm, basically how the wreck was scanned. And then next week, on Wednesday next week, we have the history. What has the 3D model taught us? What has the orthophoto revealed, or the orthophotos revealed, and what has it allowed us to prove? What is and isn't there? Plus, a look into what the archives has taught us about the wreck as well, because we found some unusual and surprising results in the archives. You think it's been done, you think everything's been found. When you start to pick into the history, you realize there is more to learn about this wreck. So let's make a start. And there we go. So just quick agenda, what we're going to walk through tonight. Just a very brief introduction on me and what I do in the world and all those good things. Then how it all began. What started me on this journey towards photogrammetry, and how do you end up going from just taking a few images and stitching them together to how do you do a 4,800 ton wreck to how do you end up doing work with the police at crash scenes. A little bit of story about that. Then we'll go much deeper into what is photogrammetry. And I'm going to walk through part of the wreck, how it was scanned, how it was turned into a 3D model from 2D photographs. It isn't a particularly difficult, challenging process. There's a series of key steps. We'll just step through them, explain what goes on, but then we'll look at how we add value by making those models have scale and GPS positioning. So not only how big are they, but whereabouts in the world are they located? And that's where 3D reconstruction starts to become more valuable than just a shape of what it looks like. We'll have a look at the Wrecks at Risk project. There's two aspects to that. There's the historical stuff that we done in 2017. It was actually 4 years ago today or tomorrow, I think, I got an aircraft to fly to Hurghada to do this job. And the first images, I think, were created on the 1st of July. So it's nearly reaching its 4th birthday. The good news is that we have secured some funding to go back and continue the the field work. So we'll have a look at how we're going to approach the project again. Because what I learned what I did 4 years ago, I wouldn't do the same again. It's going to be different. It's going to be done in more refined ways. There's things I've learned, progress has been made. We'll have a quick look at the book that we've published. As a result of this, there's been a wider collaboration between the project members. That's myself, John Henderson, Mike Postons, and we were joined or collaborated with Alex Mustard as well. And we'll talk about his contribution to the book. Finally, just have a look at courses and resources that are available to BSAC members on this, and then at the end we'll have a very, very brief look at what part 2 is going to have next week, followed by, at the end, any questions. So just a little bit about me. I am actually a BSAC diver, dive leader, qualified as a dive leader 20 years ago. I also held HSC Scuba, some Trimix tickets, things like that. I have remained open circuit, mainly because when you've got the task loading of a camera to get ready and all the other kit that goes with creating photogrammetry, having a rebreather to care for feels like it's going to tip me into a place that is task load heavy, so I've avoided it. I am an author, 2 books, the story of the UB116, which is the wreck that lies in Hoxha Sound in Orkney, and a co-author of Diving the SS Thistlegorm. Photogrammetry work has appeared in places like National Geographic Television, Discovery Channel, Discovery Canada Channel. I did some work for them, and as has been said already, last year I won the 2020 Royal Photographic Society Science Photographer of the Year, and we'll have a look at the image that won because it is very relevant. It's the orthophoto from the Thistlegorm. Business-wise, I've actually sort of got a broad spread of interests, so broad spread of businesses as well. There's Deep 3D that does the underwater photogrammetry. Then there's AccuPixel Limited, which is a collaboration with my business partner Jose Martinez, And we look after the police forensics, the cultural heritage, the what I call high-end surveying work. We do consultancy, we've got software development, and we're also the UK dealer for UIS, which is the underwater navigation or information system that allows us to pick up GPS signals underwater and work with tablets for data capture, positioning, navigation, that kind of thing. And then finally, if any of you have ever delved into photogrammetry in any way, you'll understand it creates a mass of data. Well, I also run a data management consultancy that looks after what I would call high-end long life assets and how the data is managed to look after them. So data management is something that I also dabble in as well. So how did it all begin? Well, this is the very first 3D model I created. It's in black and white. And you can see that it's not much really. It's a pile of ballast stones. It's got a creel line running through it. There's an iron gun here, and there's a Admiralty pattern anchor here. There is also here, you can probably just see a millstone as well. This is a wreck that lies in Weymouth Bay. It was found by Graham Knott. We were looking for the remains of a crashed aircraft, and instead of turning up a Second World War aircraft remains, we actually found a Civil War era shipwreck. It's in about 25 meters of water. And the reason it's in black and white is because in 2009, 2010, I set out to try and do a plan view of the wreck by stitching stuff together, 400 images together using Photoshop. And I thought they'd all align really easily. I ended up with this really nice sort of like plan view of what a wreck looks like on the English Channel. Well, it didn't quite work that way. It took 5 days of stitching in Photoshop to get something that looked roughly right, but I didn't like it, and it was a really long-winded process. And although the result was okay, Graham loved it, I thought I don't want to go there again. It's just too long-winded. So I dropped it, forget that. But then when I started to discover photogrammetry, I saw this product called Photoscan. And I wanted to try it, so I went back to the old images, exported them and loaded them into Photoscan, or Metashape it is now, and ran it. And it aligned the images. And I can remember to this day the first moment I got hold of my mouse and I just moved the model, 3D model around, and I saw this iron gun here appear in 3D. And at that moment, 2D photography just died. It was over. 3D was the thing for me, and that was the way I was going to go. And to be honest, I've never looked back. That was the first one. So from that, it then becomes, where do you go? Well, the obvious answer, the thing that you want to do is get the color in. And the reason it was in black and white is because in the day we did this shoot to try and do the mosaic of this wreck site, it was green, it was horrible, hard work, and really the only result was to turn off the strobes and shoot in natural light. I don't like green images, so I just desaturated it. That's why it's black and white. So then another leap forward really was scanning the Gwadmina, which if you've ever dived, it's in Shetland. It's a lovely dive. It's usually good clear water up there, and it's about 70 meters long. And I wanted to do the whole ship, but it's in 38 meters of water, and by the time I'd done probably the bows and down to the boiler, I'd run out of bottom time. That was it. So I had to go back 2 days later, shoot the stern, finish it off. And this was the first time I'd taken 2 sets of data, 2 sets of images shot over different days, and built a single model. So it started to prove that you can do big things. Also got the lighting much better, much happier with that. You know, it starts to, what I call is sit in a pool of light. That's kind of the way I want my subjects to be, is they appear to be sitting illuminated, but evenly and whole. This also became the first wreck that I managed to get scaling and referencing in, and get that GPS positions from sonar data to locate it and to scale it. So this was quite a first for this one. And then in 2017, just to go back, on that point, I swam this. It was a lot of swimming. There's probably 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think I worked out I swam about 1.5 kilometers scanning this wreck, roughly. And it's exhausting. And one thing I don't like for two reasons: is exercise underwater because it isn't good and can introduce a bend, and secondly, I'm lazy. I don't like swimming too far. So I had to solve that problem. So this was the where we first used something that I call the heart of gold, which is where I mounted the camera onto a scooter, and the scooter then could drag me around the wreck, and you can work much more efficiently. You are, you're not loading yourself up physically, and you can basically point the scooter, set the camera on an interval timer, and just shoot images. And I think there was 1,600 images to get the main part of the UB116 done. So that was the first time we used the scooter back in 2017. It is a very good technique if you want to scan large subjects. And that's really how it started. From then, this became, well, how big can we go? And the answer is you're pretty much unlimited. The only thing that restricts you in the end is computer hardware and your time underwater to gather the images. And as long as you've got the images that overlap and stitch together, you can build some very, very large and complex models. So what I'm going to do now is dip into what is photogrammetry in a far more detailed way. And rather than go through a series of dry slides, I'm just going to end the show, and we're going to look at the Thistlegorm data. So with photogrammetry, what we have to do is shoot typically never less than 100 images of anything. Sometimes you get away with less if it's a small subject, but in this case, we've got this part of the Thistlegorm, which, if we have a look, is it's actually the starboard locomotive, or the remains of the starboard locomotive. This is only a very tiny subset of what we're looking at. And I've done that because if we start to look at the big main model and try to understand simple concepts, it just gets a bit heavy. So we're looking at just the starboard locomotive, which, if you've ever dived it, you'll remember it's roughly amidships, about 20 meters, 30 meters off, 20 meters off the wreck on the starboard side. So what we do is shoot lots of images. And you can see here, I'm looking down, I'm shooting downwards, and I've got another one here, which is roughly, well, more than roughly, it is overlapping the first one. And that's the goal. You want these images to overlap so they run in sequence. And you can see I'm turning now, gathering images, and crucially, each image overlaps. And what we then do is load all of the images that we want to align into Metashape, and we ask it to find common points. And it's common points that exist between the overlapping images. And if I just turn on the view of the points, you'll see now all the blue points are points that Metashape has found in this image and has matched to another image. The white points are points or clusters of pixels that it's found that it likes the look of, but it can't match. So, okay, fine. I don't understand where this goes, but I'm going to just record that I saw it. These blue points are the valuable ones because these allow us to tie together all of the images into a single bundle. And it's tying these images together is really the simplest part, but also the most complex in terms of the maths that goes on. We know that light travels in a straight line. So let's just zoom in. I'll choose this point here at random. The light that came off of that cluster of picture of the subject has passed through the lens in a known and predictable way, and it's landed on the sensor. And on the matching point in another image, it's done the same thing. But because it's in a slightly different position relative to the frame of the image, you can then start, the software can then start to work out where the camera sensor was when you press the shutter. It starts to tie the images together in a way that starts to then make visual 3D sense. And that's what we get here. Each one of these points in this little cluster has been extracted from the 2D photograph as like a tie point to say, I exist because I am in more than one image. And if we just have a look now at the photographs, you can see each one of them understands where it is in 3D space. And this is without any other reference. It's just understanding that in this image here, if I turn these on, let's show thumbnails, you can start to see, let's make that a little bit bigger, there we go. You can start to see how the software understands from here to here to here to here to here. These matching points on these overlapping images must go together. And that is really what we're exploiting when we create a 3D model. Just of interest, I just had a look before we started at the details. I was just curious. You can see, I'll make those a little bit smaller. You can see that this image here was my entry point. I'm on a scooter, remember, and I've come round here. You can see the track I've taken, and I've looped around, back round, back round, back round, and then up, and then finally looped and gone. I'm going back towards the wreck. That's the path I took. And I just had a look at the time that I actually spent shooting these images, and it was actually 1 minute 30 seconds from beginning to end. That's all it took. And that was gathering enough information to create what I would consider now to be a rough representation of this locomotive. So from that, once we've got our what we call our sparse cloud of all these little points, we can then ask Metashape to extract more information from the 2D image. And we actually get, as we can work through, we get several things that we can get. One of them is what's called the dense cloud, where the dense cloud is asking Metashape to look at each image and extract as many points, common points as it can from the known organization of tie points. And it gives us this representation of what the locomotive looks like. Now, it is hollow. It has dots. It has no volume. If it was closed, it had no volume. If it has no surface area, because there are, as you can see here, if I just zoom in again, it starts to get more and more and more points appearing. It's a cloud. Each point has a position in space. Each point has a color, but it is only point information. Now, this can be useful for analysis and other work. And at the time, the point cloud, the dense cloud as this is called, was the only route to getting a 3D model, a solid thing. Because the next step would be then to drape a skin or a surface over all of these points to give it 3D form. And that's what we've got if we just turn this on. This is a zero thickness skin of a mesh series of triangles laid over the top of all those points. And it starts to give us a much more realistic view of what the model looks like. It's not perfect. Now, looking back on it, knowing what I know now, I can see all the flaws and errors. For example, you may see here, we've got this sort of morphic shape. And if I just turn on the shaded version, you'll see there's like this area here, which is very smooth and very uniform in color. It doesn't look like up here on the smoke box of the engine, which is rich, detailed. And what's happened here is that I've actually had a gap. I've left a gap, didn't have enough images. I thought I had enough images to create a good model. In reality, I'm doing an entire ship, so you are going to lose detail. But in this point, if I was to do this railway engine again, I would probably do 200 images, maybe even 300 to get the detail, and it would get rid of this area here, because what's happening is there's not enough images to really cover the detail off. So Metashape starts to it's called interpolate, and it creates a mesh to fill in the gap, and that's what we're seeing there. So it looks good, but my hypercritical eye now is saying you could have done a bit better. So we've got the mesh, and it looks colored here, but it's not the final rendering, because there's another step we can take, which is called adding a texture. And what that does is take the color information from the 2D images, and it actually drapes an image, a single image, over the top. And what that gives us is a far more natural looking render, as it's called, of the subject, in this case the locomotive. Now we get this quite quickly and quite simply. We have now what I call a representation of what's down there. But if you want to ask questions which require measurement or anything like that, what you can't do is take measurements from a model that hasn't any constraints or any references. So what we have is a very pleasing shape to say to your friends, this is what it looks like on the seabed. But if, for example, you wanted to know how far the rail has been deformed by the explosion, you can see it's bent, both of them. I just draw a line along here. So if I go from here along there, you can see there is some deformation has occurred, and we're pretty sure that that's the explosion that blew the ship apart. When we find the boiler, the starboard boiler, we're confident that we're going to find that boiler is going to be damaged, and it will match the damage on this frame here. It's definitely bent. So if you want to measure that with any confidence, you can't. So the first thing you can do, if you need that, is to add what's called scale constraints. Now, I've got 2 scale bars in this model. You can see there's a scale bar between this marker and this marker, there's the yellow line, and there's another one here between the frames here, that red line there. And that is where I'm giving a real world value taken from the engineering plans of the vehicle, of the locomotive, and I'm saying to Metashape, between these 2 points and these 2 points, I know these values. And what Metashape will then do is scale the model based on those constraints. 2 dimensions is okay, 3 is better, 4 or 5 even better still. So, but what you can do is then Metashape will then estimate the error of what it thinks that dimension should be, and these numbers are not unreasonable. In the forensic work with the police, these are the kind of values you can get at a road collision, and that's kind of where the loop for me has been closed a bit. I can take the application of what we're doing on the forensics, put it back into the water, start to sort of get even better results from the models that we create from the seabed. So that now means that I can take any arbitrary dimension I want and be very confident that's what it is. Yeah, I can measure quite comfortably points or distances, and I can understand where things are on the seabed. So this would now enable us to measure how far the frame is deformed. We can measure that, no problem. We can measure anything we like, take any arbitrary dimension and answer the question. But it doesn't tell us where in the world it is. It only tells us how big it is. So what I've done here is given latitude and longitude and depth as a minus value. As an altitude, you express depth as minus to the cameras. All of the cameras in this, where are we? Just bear with me. Yeah, thank you. All of the cameras have a physical position in the world, and you can extract this in several ways. Topside, you get this with drones. You can get very, very accurate GPS positions from drone imagery, because the drone is, can see 10, 15, maybe 18 satellites. And if you're using what's real-time kinematics, it can be calculating its real-world position constantly as it's shooting its images. Underwater, we can't do that. So I will hold my hand up in here and say I've cheated a little bit, because I took the estimated positions of the cameras that we'll talk about in a minute and apply them. But by using the estimate, by using longitude, latitude, and altitude, we can then further constrain the model. So not only does it understand how big it is, but where it is in the world. And for me, this is suddenly becoming quite exciting, because we can describe things on the seabed at a very, very high level of detail, but also with a high degree of confidence with accuracy at scaling, and also where is it? And it's that whole bundle of data that adds considerable value to a simple 3D model. So that's basically how we go from a bunch of images to a single 3D model. It's not particularly complex. The key thing is, firstly, image quality. You have to have, I'll just turn those points off, sharp, in focus imageries. If you have blur, it can either be, or it's out of focus. So if you're trying to pan a camera and you press the shutter and the shutter speed's too slow, you get blurring. That will introduce problems. If you haven't focused the camera properly, that will introduce problems. The quality of the images that goes in needs to be the best possible you can deliver on the day at that time. So sharp images, also lacking noise as well. If you are using an old camera where the sensor can generate noise, which is those purple flecks you see sometimes in images, that will cause problems too, because Metashape is looking deeper and deeper right into the pixel level to find little clusters of points. Let's see if we've got any. Yeah, there you go. It's found something there it likes. It's found something there it likes. Quite what it finds, I don't know, and I suspect it's a trade secret from Magistral's point of view, but it's found something right there that it says, I recognize that, and I recognize it in another image, and it's unique enough for me to tie them together. That's what it's doing. So you need to feed high quality information or images in. It will deliver good results back. The second thing is to make sure the images overlap. If you remember right at the beginning, I showed you in sequence this image here. If I just turn the points off there. Go away. Get rid of that. I want that. There we go. So we've got this image here, 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 this one here. You can see that they're all in sequence, apart from the first one. So as long as they're not necessarily in sequence, but as long as there is good overlap, and by good I mean 70 to 80% overlap between each image, got a very good fighting chance of getting a 3D model out at the end of it. So from that, which is just 160, let me see, 163 images, a nice little small subject. It didn't take long to shoot. Okay, I was on a scooter, so it was 1.5 minutes to go around it. Looking back on it, I'd have done another lap and made sure that I got the images to cover this bit, so that we didn't lose the rail. Just as an aside, we do have an option to look at what's called model confidence, and this will reveal in red any areas of concern. The blue areas got lots of images, they're happy. The red areas are where there is less information or less images describing what the surface looks like. So that's a handy little tool. So we've gone from, like I say, 160 or so images and a very small subject. How do we then scale it up? And what does it look like? Well, the short answer is if I just enable this and turn that on, because both models are GPS referenced, they both go together. And if I zoom out, you can start to see the rest of the wreck. And the short answer of how do you do it is, instead of doing it 163 times, is to do it 15,000 times around the wreck. And that's what it took. 15,000 images to describe the Thistlegorm on the outside, not the inside. We haven't looked at that yet, but if we turn on the images, and I'll just make those a little bit smaller because they're, like I say, it's getting a bit heavy on the graphics. It does slow down a bit. You can see my tracks that I took using the scooter to scan the wreck. There we go. You can see there's something out here, something on the seabed out here. We'll have a look at that later on the ortho photo. But as I'm coming along with the scooter, this is probably the first day. This is my track here. I've seen something. I've diverted and looped out, gone round it, and carried on. And that's basically how I built it up. I started from the outside, went round the outside of the site, and then slowly worked my way in before really ending somewhere near probably the top of the wheelhouse. And that took, I think, 3 days. I could look back, but I think it's 2.5 days of doing 2 or 3 dives a day to go around the wreck, make sure I've got all the images to cover it. Because the one thing that you don't want when you get back to UK and start processing it is to find out there's one image missing and you can't align. And you end up with 2 sets of data, 2 sets of images, both that align separately, but they won't join together. And that's the most frustrating thing. So I've probably got more images than I need here to give a full 100% coverage. But that's driven by paranoia and a slight desire to get it right and make sure we don't have to go back because, let's be honest, it's quite an effort to get to the Red Sea, and you want to leave with everything. So that's what I made sure I did. So let me just turn the cameras off again. No, go away. There we go. So we end up with a 3D model of the Thistlegorm. And what we did, actually, one of the people who was on the team that did the work is on the call, and they went off and measured the wreck. So what we put in, I haven't put them in actually on this model, is a series of, we measured the holds. Let's put the 3D model on. It'll take a while to refresh because it's quite a graphically heavy thing now, because we're looking at a model with 35 million faces in it, so it's quite busy. But what we did is the other people on the team went out and measured key parts of the wreck. So while I was scooting around, they would go out and measure the size of the holds, positions of things relative to the holds, and from that, plus also measuring GPS positions, we could start to, sorry, wrong one. I want that one on. There we go. We could start to scale the wreck. So the combination of measurements taken from the physical wreck, actually, distance measurements. So how far is it from the corner of this hold to this hold? There's this here. How far is it between the holds? Any linear measurement that they could get, we put into the wreck, into the model. So that started to build up a constraint. And they also went out and measured GPS points, such as the port locomotive, the bow, the stern, and some other key areas. So we could then position it. And Metashape allows you to work in this way where you can have constraints from GPS or from scale or a combination of both. And with a combination of both, there is some features on here that give me very, very good high confidence that what we managed to scan and build is very representative within millimeters, I think. So one of this is obviously just some of the outputs. We've got the dense cloud, we've got the 3D model, the mesh, but we've also got that we can also get something called a DEM, or a digital elevation model. And this is a visual representation of the site. It's kind of like a 2.5D view. It's a 2D image, but it's expressing color as depth. In this case, it's 11 meters. It's the shallowest part of the wreck. This is the wheelhouse, and that's in red. And then the darker areas down here, 34, 33 meters, is the deeper part. So you get this wonderful color rendering. And This is particularly useful if you want to hunt for things, because if you start looking around, you can see that the seabed looks fairly sort of, lumpy, bumpy, but then straight lines start to appear. We've got the straight lines here. You can see the straight lines of the starboard locomotive. But then if you're looking here, you think, oh, what's that? Something else on the seabed that I did see while I was scooting around, but had no time to stop and think what it was. So you start to raise questions. What are these things? There's something else here. You can see there's some of the driving wheels for the locomotive. And if we move further back, you can start to see there's other linear shapes. This is part of the hold. This is part of the cross beams from hold 4. And if we look back here, you'll also see, if we look down here, I think, where's it gone? I've only spent years looking at this and I can't find it. Let's find it on the author photo, but let's go back here first. So this is the elevation model. It allows us to start asking questions. What is that? It helps visually define things. If we have a look at the author photo, now this is the author mosaic, as it's called here. This is a single 2D image at a resolution of 2.12 millimeters per pixel, and this is the image that won the RPS Science Photographer of the Year, because it's scaled, because we can zoom in, we can start to examine things in far greater detail, and because it's scaled, we can then also take measurements. And from that, we were able to prove that this is one of the driving rods from the Stanier Association. We sent them this screenshot with some images, with some measurements on it, and they confirmed it was a driving rod from one of the railway locomotives. So you can start to pick into and interrogate more detail about what's down there. You can see here, for example, it looks like some meshing. Now, is that modern rubbish, or is it part of the wreck? Don't know, but I'm quietly confident that that is not only part of the wreck, but it's one of the 4.5-inch shell cases from hold number 4 or hold number 5. See, there's the base and the cylindrical tube. It's been flattened by water pressure. So you can start to browse to your heart's content. I spent a long time looking at this because I'm curious and I want to know what's there. For example, what's over here? Don't know. There's other stuff everywhere. But then if we come down here, this is the remains of hold 4 on the starboard side. We can see there's an axle, probably from a trailer. It's a solid axle. Then moving to the east, we've got a railway locomotive wheel. And here we've got the remains of a vehicle. You can see this is probably the front axle. This looks like the remains of the engine. And here we've got the rear axle with the differential housing. The rest of the vehicle's gone. It's either been destroyed in the explosion or rotted away through time. But we can start to look at and understand that this vehicle is almost certainly a 4x2 military tread tyres, probably in hold 4. So we get more than just a 3D model. We get far richer data that allows us to ask questions and answer them. The shells, for example, here, this is the in hold number 4. These are 15-inch shells, and they were going to, as the ship was going to Alexandria, it's likely that they were going to be used on HMS Barham if they ever got there. She was the only British battleship in the Eastern Med with 15-inch guns. So these shells were going to HMS Barham. And then down the bottom, I can't help it. I like to put people into my model. I like to scan them. They haven't done very well in staying still. There's one thing that photogrammetry cannot cope with, and that is movement. So if anything moves, it won't be recorded, or it starts to get confused and you end up with ghosting. Now, this is Mike Poston's. He's got what looks like 3 legs because his leg moved as I swam around them. John Henderson, he's done a bit better, but then his tank moved. But you get the idea. They're representative, and it gives you, or gives the non-diver who's never been there, a perfect scale factor to understand how big the thing is, and it is big. It's quite an impressive wreck. If you've never dived it, please do. If you have dived it, you'll understand. The other areas that we went into was the forecastle room, which is the room at the front under the winches on the forward deck. Small little room. We found things in there that we'll talk about next time. Answer some questions about what is actually in there and what's it for. We've got the saloon house as well, which is just under the captain's house. It's got the bathtub and the sink, but you can also see there are radiators. The remains of another sink here. Another radiator's fallen off the wall. More radiators here. It's clearly a heated room. Okay, so we wanted to go inside the wreck as well and record what's there. The orthophoto from that is just something I really enjoy wandering around and having a look and seeing what I can find. This is the upper deck, so we've got the Morris commercials with the BSA motorcycles in. If you really want to, you can zoom in and measure the tire treads if you wish. It's something I can lose myself in for a few hours. We have also found where Cousteau stole the motorbike. He lifted a motorbike in 54, 53. And we know where that's come from as well. We know where it's come from, or what we don't know is where it's gone to. So there is a motorbike missing. In parts of here we can find bits of like the aircraft wings. You can see the Lysander wings here, and if we wander into the open part of hold 2, in the debris pile, you can see there's more parts of airframe there, alongside Lee Enfield rifles. So the orthophotos really did start to give us this tool to ask lots of questions. And if we just zip over to the lower deck, which I think is one of my favorite orthophotos ever, it really did help with the research. We could zoom right in, right into the cargo. Look at these are the Fordson lorries with the Norton motorbikes in. We've got the aircraft accumulator carrier batteries for starting aircraft. If we scroll up here, we've got a cylinder from one of the engines, the aircraft engines. There's another one just there. You can see the exhaust shrouds of the radial engines. It's all packed in there, and it's something that I've spent a long time, we've all spent a long time looking through it and finding out what's exactly there. And as you can see, it's packed in pretty tight. There isn't much space in this ship left at all. The fuel tankers, and here we've got, at the bow, we've got the Lee Enfield rifles, and these mystery objects. We don't know what these things are. They've got a sort of almost a square section one end and a cylindrical section the other, with this tube coming out. I don't know what they are. We don't know what they are. We spent a long time looking at these gearboxes, vehicle gearboxes. Don't know, doesn't look right. You look at these here, it looks like there's some sort of grill on the inside. Don't know. We'd like to know what they are. If anyone's got any guess, please let us know. We'd love to know. So that's the sort of the what we did and what we got, and well, how we did it and what we've got. So I'm going to nip back now to the presentation, and we'll just finish off there. So Thistlegorm project, how did all this stuff come into being? Well, it started off with Dr. John Henderson, who was then at Nottingham University, going and raising funds for us to go out and start to take a look at the Egyptian wrecks and start to think about the long-term care and conservation of them, if you like. The value of diving in the Red Sea for Egyptian economy is not to be underestimated, and in particular the Thistlegorm has to be one of the biggest draws there. But it's like all these things, it is under pressure. You know, a lot of people visiting it and diving it. We do know Alex's work has revealed that stuff is still being stolen from it and still being taken for scrap. Steering wheels are going, you know, stuff is going from it. And when you dive it and look at it, it's like you don't realize what's missing until you watch Cousteau's video. And if you watch Cousteau's video from '54, he shot cinefilm on it, and it's just stunning. You know, it really is. The wreck is a shadow of its former self, and what we've done is create a baseline so that we can at least monitor it and say, this has changed, this is happening. And we've already know that in the years since, the port anchor, which was in its hawser, the anchor chain has failed and it's now on the seabed. So, you know, people tying into the wreck has damaged it. And when we go back, we can rescan that area and create a little small model of it, maybe to record the change. So, but basically what we did was spend a week moored up over the wreck. This is Mike Postons. He's the 3D reconstruction guy. He will have a look, and we'll have a look at his work in more detail on Wednesday. There's me in the saloon. There's the lower cargo deck as a sparse, sorry, that's the upper cargo deck as a sparse cloud. It was quite an intense time. We dive, process data, or set data processing, do another dive, come back, merge data. It was a constant full-on sort of 5 or 6 days of eat, sleep, dive, data process, repeat. This here is what I call the heart of gold. It's my camera, where you can see it mounted here, on a scooter. And the camera is set to take a photograph every second. You then set the flash guns up, you set everything up, and then you just set it going and point it at what you want to cover. And it is a very, very efficient way of covering large areas. I would not have wanted to swim and shoot by fin, as it were, the Thistlegorm without something like this. It reduces the physical loading on your body no end. Mike and John concentrated on the 3D, the 360 immersive video. You can see here, this is actually a single frame from 360 view from there to there, roughly. That's why the wreck is so distorted. But there are 360 videos available on the Thistlegorm project website. If you put a VR headset on and watch them, they really do feel very immersive. It's scary, scarily good. This is the 360 video camera. It's just being mounted on the scooter because we did a fly around of it, of the whole wreck. There's John setting up the camera next to the prop at the stern. Again, it's quite task and data intensive. You know, this camera has got 6 O-rings to manage, look after 6 cameras, 6 sets of video files at the end of it to download, gigs and gigs and gigs of data. This stuff is quite heavy. Just a few statistics. It was actually 12 dives, not 13. It was 13 hours and 45 minutes in the water. I think just about every dive by one involved some decompression stop of some mandatory decompression stop of some sort. And I shot 24,307 high res. Alex must have then added 304 in his trip to the Red Sea the next year to shoot the captain's house, the bit I missed, couldn't get to. Processing, 65 days to turn all of those images into the 3D models, the 2D ortho photos, and the digital elevation models. And that was actually parallel processing using my local PC, but also Amazon Web Services. Amazon Web Services, you know, it's a great, people talk about cloud computing, it's the greatest thing. Yeah, it is, but it's still somebody else's computer in the cloud, and that will shut down and apply a Windows update if you don't tell it not to. You know, it wasn't without its frustrations. And some of the hardware I was using was $7 an hour, so you can rack up quite a quick bill. So you want to make sure you're processing the right data at that rate. The main site, the whole wreck, was just too big to really process in one go. 15,000 at the time anyway. 15,000 images is quite significant. So Metashape has a script that allows you to basically cut the wreck into chunks, and each chunk was processed in its own right as a model before being put back together. Now, because it's georeferenced and because Metashape understands where each of those chunks go in 3D space and in the real world, they could be saved and processed externally and then brought back and merged back together to form a single continuous model with no error. And there's the team. That's the team that did it. It was an international collaboration with our Egyptian colleagues from Ain Shams University in Cairo and the Alexandria University, the Underwater Heritage Department. And I believe at least one of the team members is on the call. Hello, Mohammed. Good to see you again. Hopefully see you again in for flesh in the real this year. So we are going back. We are going back hopefully later this year, maybe early next. Depends on the COVID situation, of course. But we're going back to the Red Sea to do two things. We're going to do another rec. We're open to suggestions as to which one. I know everyone wants the Rosalie Muller. That's high up our list. That also has the problem of depth that puts it into a different category. So we may not end up doing that, but we have our thoughts about what we'd like to see as 3D. We're open to suggestions. We are going to go back to the Thistlegorm as well. There are areas like the cold store and the locomotive remains. Alex has found the port boiler. It's further out from the wreck, but he's found it and knows where it is. So we want to extend the 3D survey out to that. We want to take sonar, and we want to take this chap here, Graham Knott, who understands his stuff with sonar, because we think that seabed around the wreck is going to be a target-rich environment. This is an example of sonar. You've got here some shadows of something on the seabed. I can't remember what that is. I think that might be the P-47 crash site in Weymouth Bay. And this one is a wreck, and I think this is the Arakan, which is a sailing ship in the English Channel. We want to apply this out alongside the Thistlegorm because I think there is a lot to be discovered out on that seabed. And we also want to use UIS, the underwater information system that I've been working with for the last 18 months. This is UIS in action. What it's got is 3 buoys that sit on the surface, and each of these buoys are transmitting a sonar position to this tracking unit that then figures out where it is and calculates a GPS position. So we're getting GPS underwater. We also can use it with a tablet in this case, this is the Vobster photogrammetry project that's got a Vobster orthophoto, which is georeferenced, as a background to the navigation. So as you're finning around, you're looking at the orthophoto. And you can give this to a complete stranger and tell them to navigate to any target in the lake, and they can find it, even if they've never dived the site before. Zero knowledge, just follow the line and it will take you there. And you can also record positions, you can make notes on it, and you've got two-way diver communication as well. We also use this as a data gathering tool to capture the camera position. You can mount this tracking unit close to the camera, so it's recording the camera position. And we've developed a piece of software, AccuPixel, that then merges the camera position to the camera to the GPS position. And with merged data, we can then do what we call sort of control pointless reconstruction by scaling the model from the GPS positions of the cameras. You can also take down, if you really want to, your own 3D model that's hosted on Sketchfab onto the tablet and look at the thing that you've got on your tablet if you really want to. I did this as an experiment, and I couldn't still quite get my head around what I was looking at. I was looking at a tablet underwater, 20 meters in Vobster, of the Sea King helicopter, and in front of me was the Sea King helicopter. And this is, you can spin this around, even using thick gloves, you can still manipulate the screen, spin it around, zoom in, all that good stuff. So that's something that we might be doing when we go back. And with going back as well, this here is hinting at what we might try. This is actually Brett Seymour from the US National Park Service over in the States. AccuPixel are collaborating with them in a consultancy basis to extract as much information from their method of data capture. And what we're doing is, because these cameras are known in fixed distances, we can reconstruct 3D models with accurate scale without actually putting scale bars in. It's exploiting the fact that we know how far these cameras are apart to rebuild and reconstruct 3D without measuring anything, without putting scale bars in. It's quite exciting. It also delivers a massive level of detail as well. Just finished processing some, and it was 0.4 of a millimeter per pixel over this area, which I think is about 100 meters by 60. So that's the kind of level of detail you can get. So that's what we're up to, hopefully, this year. We shall see. And finally, pitch for next week. What have we learned since the surveying? The short answer is a lot. The ship was not built to plan. Where did Cousteau steal the motorbike from? Where did he lift it from? Where's the rest of the locomotives? We know some of the answers to that. What's in the silt in the captain's house? The dates of the guns being fitted, mystery objects, some of which we sold. And I always think British intelligence can be an oxymoron at times, but yes, they got it wrong in 1941 when the Thistlegorm was sank. We'll just basically have a deeper look into what the ortho photos and what the 3D models taught us and told us and exposed to us for us to go off and prove what it is and what it isn't. There is extra parts of the railway locomotive on both sides of the wreck that are hiding in plain sight, and I suspect people have been finning over them for decades and not realizing what they are. So some of them we now know exactly what they are and where they come from. So just a reminder, all of this came out of what's called the Thistlegorm project. Now, this was a project collaboration between the University of Nottingham and Anne Shane's University in Cairo and the Underwater Archaeology Centre at the University of Alexandria. And we all worked together on this, and what we're about to see is part of what we found. There's the team coming back or heading back to Hurghada at the end of a very, very busy week. 13 hours in the water on the Thistlegorm, 12 dives. It was quite it's quite a pleasure, to be honest, just be able to tie up off the wreck and say, right, okay, what are we doing today? Well, we're diving the Thistlegorm 3 times. I never got bored, ever. And I was always finding things to scan. And in the end, we ran out of time. There are areas of the wreck that we missed, I didn't cover at the time. Some of them are quite cramped and difficult to get into, like the crew quarters. They, because of their access, may never be scanned, I don't know. And then there was other areas off the wreck that we now know we need to explore. So that'll be future. On return, started to talk to Alex Mustard. Now, Alex, as you probably know, is a very successful underwater photographer, and he had spent, I think, somewhere between 2 and 3 years diving the wreck and recording every vehicle in the wreck, and then taking the time to go and find out exactly what make and model of the vehicles there were. And there are some very rare vehicles on there that there's either no survivors in current preservation, or maybe one in the whole world. And we'll have a look at some of those today. He went round and thought, you know what, I need to go through and I really identify each vehicle. And then he put together this guide which shows you where the positions of all the wrecks of all the vehicles are on each of the decks. And when I came back and we started to publish the results, and particularly the ortho photos that we'll look at, you know, it became obvious that Alex knew what everything was, and we could tell him where it was to within a millimetre or two. So the position of everything is geo-referenced. So even though you're in the holds, we can still move around and understand geographic location and depth from the ortho photo and the 3D model. So it was clear that the sum of the parts was greater than the individual things here. So we took a view that collaborating would be a good idea, and as a result, we ended up doing an iBook. Now the iBook fell out of publication. That was a labour of love. It was reasonably successful as an iBook. but it wasn't sustainable from a licensing point of view because we used quite a lot of material from the National Imperial War Museum, and the value of the licenses to reproduce their images was about the same as what we earned from the sales of the book, so we pulled it basically. But we'll talk more about the book in the future. So where did we start? Well, archives. Although we had the 3D content, 2D ortho photos, sometimes you'd have to take a step back and think, well, what else is lurking out there? And one thing that we wanted to trace was the builder's plans, and they were hiding in plain sight. These were found. They're not. I don't think they're ever really missing, to be honest. It's just making sure you think about where they might be held, and they weren't at the National Maritime Museum in Greenwich. I thought, well, where was the ship built? And I looked at the Tyne and Weir archives, and 2 documents came back straight away. One was the builder's plans, and the other one was the specification of the engine. So I ordered copies, and these wonderful reproductions of these vellum and ink drawings came back, showing us the Thistlegorm, the size, the shape, everything. The layout of the decks, the cargo holds, all there presented to us. And it was like, oh, wow, this is a fantastic find. Because we can start to then do 2 things. Firstly, we can ask questions like, was the ship built to plan? And then secondly, because it's dimensioned, we could measure features on the 3D model and compare them to the plan. So all of the holds that would survive, holds 1 to 3, and part of hold 5, you can measure, and we verified that the dimensions on the ship's plans can correspond very, very closely to the measure of the actual 3D model itself. So we're starting to get feedback that, assuming it's all built to plan, the results of the survey are trustworthy, accurate, valid. So then we started to look at, well, is the ship built right? And there's this one area here. This is this room here. It's a bit small. I should have done a bigger copy really, but to trust me, because that says the radio room, and that was a common position to put a radio room because it's high up. It's good for broadcasting a message because you can, you've got a good view of the horizon, so you can travel. But we subsequently found out the radio room wasn't there. Even though this area of the ship, and we're talking everywhere from about here to here, beyond that here, has been effectively destroyed in the explosion of hold 4, which is around here. It's just been ripped apart. So from this, Mike Postons did a 3D reconstruction, and okay, the colors are as accurate as we think they can be, but the location, the shape, the form is scaled, it's representative. And in certain instances, like the position of the bell, that was taken from the video, the film that Cousteau shot in the 50s, when he was the first diver on the wreck, got to see the wreck in its glory. And the position of the bell was seen. There's actually a sequence where one of the divers is cleaning off with his knife the name of the wreck, revealing it for the first time. So this was a sort of Mike's work, and it was taken from a combination of the 3D model that we got from the Thistlegorm, but then from the builder's plans reconstructed and rendered in color. So it's the color, like I say, the color, we can only speculate. We don't know. We also don't know if the trains were actually stored here, the locomotives. We know there were 2 Stanier 8F locomotives on board. There's rumours of extra water tenders on board as well, but there's no evidence of where they exist. So we can only speculate that that is the correct position for the locomotives. Digging further into the archives, we found basically an audit trail or a history of the ship. So everything from this certificate of registry, this records, like the Lloyd's data, how heavy, how much cargo, the size, the tonnage, all that kind of thing, where it was built. It also records, you notice the red line through the middle, the strikeout and there's then a hand-edited note added on the 26th of December 1941, so they were working on Boxing Day, striking off the registry after sinking back in October. One thing caught my eye, and that's the signal letters. Somebody has hand annotated down the sign GLWQ, which was her call sign, her flag sign. And it's that kind of thing that you sort of stumble across in archives and you think somebody took the time just to write that and then draw a picture. And I think with digital archives these days, firstly, the volume of data we're creating these days is massive. Secondly, it's not indexed, it's difficult to search and find. And thirdly, do we really go into hand annotating stuff and putting little notes in it? I don't know. It'd be a problem for the future historians. But to find things like this, it's quite a nice little reminder that there were humans doing this back in 1940. One of the documents turned up a bit of a treasure trove, and that was there was an official sort of like history or an analysis of DEMs. Now, DEM stands for defensively armed, defensively armed merchant ships, and the policy of the UK government was to make sure every merchant ship was equipped with guns. They would only fire from the stern aft. They were never placed in the bow because that would be treated as an offensive weapon. They were intended to be defensive. And when war was announced, Germany decided to announce that, well, you know, these boats are now authorized to sink these armed vessels. We're saying sink them. And it's assumed that the guns on these British ships are not intended for hunting seals. You know, even in times of war, there can be some sort of, how should we say, I wouldn't say humour, dark humour perhaps, but, you know, we can't help but having a jibe at people. So all of this was buried in the archives. The second thing we found in this document was a series of these confidential Admiralty fleet orders. There's a copy of one here. And I think if you see just here, the Thistlegorm is listed. There's her tonnage, gross tons, and then you can see there's a 4-inch low altitude gun and a 12-pounder high altitude or high elevation gun. And then the paravanes are fitted. Now, what we found was a series of these fleet orders dating from July 1940, where the ship has been degaussed. There's a column here that was filled out as being degaussed in the first document. And then the first gun, the 4-inch low angle gun, was fitted in 1940 along with the paravanes. And then July 1941, so just before she sailed for Alexandria, the 12-pounder was fitted. So they were armed over a series of almost, well, a year really, not in one go. The interesting point about these, the armaments, is who paid for them. The Admiralty paid for the guns. The Admiralty would pay for defensive shields on the main armaments, the main guns. So the 4-inch and the 12-pounder had defensive armaments, shields placed around them at the expense of the Admiralty. The Admiralty also paid for ships to be stiffened and the decking area to be strengthened so that the weight and the load exerted by the gun would be taken and wouldn't damage the ship. What the Admiralty wouldn't pay for is any shielding around machine guns. Now, there was a secondary armament of 303 machine guns fitted, and this is the mount from one of them, we believe. The gun is missing, but this has a shield around it. You can see here, this would have been mounted vertically. There's a bracket here that would have held it onto the side of the bridge, and then this shield would have helped protect the gunner. Now, we know that the owners paid for the shield. So they were, you know, taking some care, realizing that the people doing the job of defending their ship might like to stand behind a bit of steel plate for some protection. So they paid for that. Now, this is a couple of Alex's images of the rear of the two guns. You can see that this gun here has still got its defensive shield hanging on, as paid for by the Admiralty. And then at the stern, the aft gun, the 12 pounder, has lost its defensive shield. That's actually triggered a question for me. I wonder if it's lying on the seabed. I shall see. We'll have a look. The paravanes were one of the first pieces of defensive equipment added. Now the paravanes are a very, they're not strictly an armament, they're not a weapon of sorts, but they stream from the bows. They're like torpedoes, but they stream from the bows, extending a chain or rope out across in front of the ship. And the idea is that they would snag any tethered mines. And in snagging the mine would then be dragged away from the ship, where it would detonate on the paravane or could be destroyed by gunfire. Now, passing of time has left both starboard and port paravanes in pretty poor condition. You can see that the port version here is under the mast. There's the mast laying on top of it. There isn't a lot left. And the starboard version has only got its tail section just to the aft of the water tender. It's just here. But you can see this U-shaped bracket on the deck. That's the mounting for the paravane. So it would have sat in that cradle. If you imagine a torpedo, that's roughly what it looks like. We also found a 1946 chart. Now, in his book, if you've ever read it, The Living Sea, Cousteau says he took a long time to find the wreck. Now, I just wonder how long he took. The Admiralty chart for 1946 has got a wreck symbol marked on the chart, and this is actually a view of the orthophoto in context. So there's the Red Sea and the Abu Nahas, Straits of Gubal here, and that little dot is viewing the orthophoto of the Thistlegorm in context. And if you check the position of the wreck mark that's on the chart, it's within about 60 to 80 meters of where the ship is today. So I just wonder how hard it was for Cousteau to find the wreck. I don't know is the short answer, but there may be some artistic and poetic license in the story of searching for the wreck. There is also the rumour, and it is a rumour, we haven't confirmed it, that the masts were still sticking out of the water at that time in 1950s. Looking at where the masts are lying today, I don't believe the masts in their current position would have been blown there by the explosion. They would have been blown forward. And in some instances, they're laying pointing towards the stern. So it's likely the masts were still there. This was a little treasure. British intelligence, the Gulf of Suez intelligence reports for 1941, October 1941, brought up this little treasure. In which is recording the sinking of the SS Thistlegorm. 38 survivors picked up, date, time, but they believed, and it was reliably reported to be a 4-injured Focke-Wulf bomber. They go on to add a comment about the aircraft they believe that bombed the ship, and they thought it was definitely a Focke-Wulf Condor, an FW-200, primarily I think because of its range and high performance. We now know it was a Heikel that sank the ship. So intelligence in times of war is always tricky. Didn't get it right then. So somebody misidentified the aircraft. The one thing that probably touched me more than anything was the citation for Angus McLay's Award for Bravery. Angus McLay was a seaman, so he's a civilian. He was a merchant navy crew member on board, and this is the trail of documents in which he is effectively awarded the George Medal, which is a civilian award for acts of bravery in the face of the enemy or in face of that kind of hostile environment. His citation here goes very briefly to explain what he did. Angus basically saw a gunner who was a naval rating, so the naval people were on board to man the guns. He was lying unconscious by the poop winch, and Angus actually got burnt quite badly in rescuing this chap, and shortly after he brought the unconscious gun to safety, the ship blew up. As we now know, the ship did indeed blow up and sink very quickly. So that was Angus's award. Now, even details like Angus's address in 1942 were recorded. And if you look on Google Earth and look at the address, it's still there on the Isle of Skye. The house is still lived in, still modern. And I wonder if its occupants realise of its historic link. So that's the archives. Quite a rich source, really, considering I didn't expect to really find anything new, but there was quite a lot came out. And I have a sneaking suspicion, if we can get back into the archives at some point, there might be a few more questions to ask. The orthophotos, though, were one of the richest source of information for us. We looked at the orthophoto last week. All of them at some point, but we'll just dip into them again, I think, because they're worth having a look. As I've said, one of the main advantages of an orthophoto is that it's taking all, in this case, on the left-hand side, all of the 15,000 images that comprise the main rec site, and it's rectifying them so that it's like a plan view. And at that point, distances and scale and georeferencing become possible as well. And each one of the each pixel has a scale, a real world scale, so you can reliably measure things. I'll just dip into that to give you an idea about what we can do. So there's the sparse cloud that we saw last week. If we just have another look at the orthomosaic, this is resolution of 2.12 millimeters per pixel, and live on screen I'm going to see if I can find that shield, and I just wonder if that's not the shield. It could be. That needs a bit more work. You'll notice there's some ghosting here, and that's because sometimes you get this ghosting because of the way the images are auto-rectify. Images taken higher up can disturb the lower view. You'll also see two divers for scale. That's Dr. Henderson, John Henderson. That's Mike Postons, who did the 3D reconstruction. I like to put people in because, as I said last week, it gives you a wonderful sense of scale about how big the wreck is. It is, when I first saw it, and I'd already said to John Henderson that, yeah, I think we can scan all of it. I hadn't actually seen it. And when I saw it, I thought, oh dear, what have I committed to? Oh well, let's give it a go. It turned out all right. But with the orthophoto, we can zoom in, and for example, if we want to get an idea of the diameter of the prop, we can measure from the boss to the tip, and it gives you an approximate diameter. That could be verified in the 3D model as well. So 2.2 meters radius, so 4.4 meter diameter propeller. And if you find anything on the seabed while you're wandering around, for example, we have a look over here, and you think, okay, I can see something here. What's that? Now, what is the wheelbase or the pitch of the axle? Well, it's about 2.03 meters. So from that, you can start to take these measurements back and start to compare them with known potential objects that you're trying to identify. So it's very, very useful. While we're here, quickly, we'll just have a look at one of the things that we did manage to identify and prove, and that's on the starboard locomotive. We looked at this in some detail last week, but one of the things we didn't look at, when you touched on briefly, is this object here. You can see it's very straight, and you can see it's quite heavy. We don't know how big it is, but we can measure it. So from there to there, you know, it's 20 centimeters wide, so it's quite a substantial thing. But it's also, if we measure from, let me just cancel that, there we go, from there to there, it's 3.3 meters long. Now, bearing in mind it's next to the railway locomotive, we did think it might be part of the railway locomotive, and we sent a picture with the dimensions to the Stanier 8F Association, and they came back and said, yep, it's a driving rod, or a main link, one of the two. I can't remember which is in the book, but being able to measure things and show people it looks like this and it's this big, they could actually go out and measure what they thought it was from their own locomotive. They've got their own real preserve railway engines. So from that, we could start to prove what things were. And we found a few more bits. You know, there's a section of a pair of wheels there. There's another wheel, a locomotive wheel down here, which is all good. But in my mind, I'm still thinking, well, where's the rest of it? It's out here somewhere. And that's part of what we're doing when we go back, is to find out what's out here. So the orthophoto, very, very powerful tool for us, indispensable, really. So let's just nip back here and present again. There we go. So one thing we could look at is the really sort of almost obsessive detail now. Who made the anchor? Now, on the 3D model on this image, you can just about see that there is a couple of marks there. And when you generate a digital elevation model, you can say, I want just this area, such as the anchor, and I want it to look in a certain way. So what I did was set up an elevation model to look at just the flukes. So the flukes are the flat view, if you like. And you can see there's a diamond in the casting. And over here, there's another almost circular form here. And that is the trademark for W.L. Byers & Co. So we could prove W.L. Byers supplied the anchors. We later had given to us a document from the purchase ledger of the Thistlegorm that they bought the anchors from W.L. Byers. And there are 3 anchors on the wreck. There's the two on the bow. One is obviously paid out because she was an anchor. There was one recently, until recently, in its hawser. Reports now that the anchor chain has failed, and this anchor is now laying on the seabed. And the likely cause of the failure of the anchor chain is mooring damage. Unfortunately, the rope have sawed through it and it's given up, collapsed. There is also a 3rd anchor somewhere, probably the stern anchor. Haven't found that yet. That's on our list. One of the reasons we documented the wreck was to create this record, this permanent record, and unfortunately the loss of the movement of the anchor has kind of, I hate to say it, proved it was a good idea to preserve it digitally before things change too much. The wreck will change, it will deteriorate, and part of that is due to human activity and diving, and having this baseline does at least help us understand what it was and what it looked like before things changed. The forward under the forecastle deck, there is a room. For those of you that know the Thistlegorm, there is a room there. This object here caught our eye. This is actually a cable drum, and we've looked at it quite some detail on the orthophoto. Before we dip into that, though, you might have noticed there's a room on the port side here, and there's another room here and here. And on the builder's plans, these 2 are listed as oil lamps storage. This room, one here and this one here, and this is listed as the carpenter's workshop. So even though it's a steel ship, they've still used plenty of wood on board. So the carpenter had his own workshop there. So that room there, you can see the dividing wall here, is the carpenter's workshop. Interestingly, in Cousteau's book, the oil lamps are on board, and they are, I think, looking at the photograph, in this room, in the main room, not in their little dedicated room storage areas. And I don't know if Cousteau moved them because it was easier to photograph them in a larger room, or whether they simply the storage room was repurposed by the crew. We don't know. But this cable drum caught our eye, and we think it's a degaussing cable. And what this would have been used for is running an electrical cable over the wreck, draping it over the ship, and then passing electric current through. And what that would do is wipe the magnetic signature from the ship, thus giving it some protection from magnetic mines, which were laid frequently at the entrances of ports and harbours, that would sit on the seabed, can do nothing until they sensed a change in the Earth's magnetic signature, the magnetic field, and that is typically caused by the passing of a ferrous, a magnetic object such as a ship or a submarine. At that point, it would detonate. But this we believe is a cable drum that would have allowed the Thistlegorm to degauss itself when it was at foreign ports, if it was necessary. It had to be repeated from initial manufacture, then after, as the ship sailed around the world, it would pick up the signature and then require degaussing again in future. Now, Cousteau, in his book again, it has a photograph of him admiring a BSA M20 on the deck of the Calypso. There should be 65 BSA motorbikes on board. For every Morris CS 1030 Morris commercial vehicle, there are 5 motorbikes stored. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Everywhere you look, each of these lorries, small trucks, has got 5 motorbikes in, except this one. This one has only got 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. That one's fallen over. That's why it looks bigger. The 5th one, is right at the back. This lorry or this vehicle is parked nose in. You can see the bonnet and the wings. There's the cab, and this is missing. Now, it hasn't fallen off and down into hold 2. It's gone. Now, looking at it, it's the most easily accessible of the motorbikes for Cousteau to lift. So we think Cousteau had this one. When we do the sonar survey, we would like to find it, because I don't believe they would have kept it. I think even after 10 or 15 years underwater, that motorbike's going to stink to high hell and it's going to be rusting in the Egyptian sun in no time. So why would you keep it? This is one of Alex's images. This is actually set with your back against the ship's hull, which is behind us. This is the bed of the lorry. You can see the motorbike, and our missing motorbike would have been on the back here, very close to the open hold. And again, another one of Alex's images is what it looked like in its heyday. So that's a BSA M20 preserved example. This is what it would have looked like. Well, this is what it looks like today. So I don't think Cousteau would have kept it. It just doesn't make any sense. It'll be out there somewhere. Actually, I'm going to go back to the orthophoto again, because according to the builder's plans, the radio room should have been somewhere about here, over the engine room in this area. But you'll notice that the deck, for some reason, have got a series of ribs. And that is because this isn't the deck, this is the ceiling. This section here, from here, all the way around here, was deck, and it extended back over here. And the force of the explosion has bent it forward. And if the radio room was in position, it would now be forced into the entrance of hold number 3. Now, there is a jumble of debris in there, but we don't think it's there. We think it's actually, where are we? In here, it's actually in is referred to as the captain's house. If we just go and have a look at the orthophoto of the captain's house, we'll explain why. So this is the room. It's actually divided into 3 rooms. You've got the main room here. This hole is an access to the saloon below, so there's been a stairway. There is in here, there's some remains of a radiator, and there is also what looks like a 12-volt battery. That's probably modern. 12-volt batteries, don't believe, were around in 1940, so that's probably been thrown off a liverboard and ended up landing in the captain's room. There is also the captain's bath and his head, and we look in the mud, the remains of one of the plug hole for the sink. So there's a lot going on here, but this room, we wondered what was going on. There's a lot of debris in there, and this caught our eye. And we're pretty convinced that this is a radio tuner. You can see that there's these discs here, that have fingers that you would move to change the frequency of the radio that we're either picking up or transmitting on. So we think this is the remains of the radio. And this isn't obviously where the builder's plan said it was. So why is it different? Well, I think the simple reason is at times of war, you wouldn't want your radio house in the most vulnerable point of the ship. You'd want it protected. And in John Keene's book, The Thistlegorm, where he interviews the wireless operator at the time speaks of being in a room that had slabs on it for some protection. And as you can see here, there's all these slabs lying on the deck. So these are, we believe, have fallen in from above, and they would have been some rudimentary protection for what is obviously one of the most sensitive and important parts of the ship, which is the bridge, and perhaps most important, the wireless, the radio room, so at least you can call for help. So that was a bit of a find. We're quite confident that the radio room is here, not aft and behind the smokestack and above the engine room. So one of the other finds as well on the orthophotos is a ship's ventilator, and obviously the ship's ventilator would have been mounted at deck level, but it's fallen in and it's now lying amongst the lorries and the Lee Enfield rifles, and I suspect everybody swims over it, doesn't even look at it, doesn't even realise what it is, but it's there. The steam engine is exposed. The engine room was more or less destroyed, or certainly the walls around it and the ceiling were destroyed by the explosion, so it has exposed the steam engine. And the spec of the steam engine, for those that like details, this caught my eye. Consumption in tons per day, and they specify good North Country coal, 17 tons per day. So that's how much coal this ship would have been burning at the time. But it had to be good North Country coal, Welsh coal, any other coal, no. It had to be North Country coal. Now, one thing to note is that there were two main boilers, but there was also an auxiliary boiler fitted. And we think the auxiliary boiler was primarily because good quality coal wasn't always available. The coal is a variable resource. If you filled up, if you bunkered less good quality, inferior coal, you'd have to burn more of it to build up steam. So the auxiliary boiler, we think, existed partially to cater for the quality of coal throughout the world. And as I've already sort of alluded to, the railway locomotives have been in a particularly rich source of what we think is very much new information. This is the port railway locomotive, one of Alex's images here with a lionfish coming towards us. You can see the shaft of one of the driving wheels or driven wheels on the seabed, and this is the remains of what we think is the port locomotive that would have been welded to the deck. These things here caught my eye in the orthophoto. They're in the coaling area of the tenders. There's another set the other side as well, and we looked at them and thought, well, what are they? We don't know. They look heavy. They look like that driving rod that link rod we found. So we sent the image off to the Stanier Association, and they came back and said, yep, that's a driving rod. That would have been removed. When you shunt a railway locomotive, if you're moving a railway locomotive and it's not under its own steam, you're trying to turn the steam engine almost backwards on itself, not backwards, but in a way that it's not being force lubricated. So you will accelerate wear on all of the moving components in the steam, in the actual steam engine part of it. So the practice was to simply remove these driving rods and let the wheels turn freely and not engage with the steam engine, so you could shunt it around to your heart's content, not damage it. So that was good to tidy that one up, quite get an answer about what they were and why, crucially. This was last year's find. I'd been seeing this object here on the seabed for quite a long time, and I've been kind of like passing it by, not really, it hadn't piqued my interest. And then one day I looked at it and I thought, well, what could it be? It can either be part of the ship, part of the ship structure, possibly from the engine room. It's an unusually cut plate, shaped plate of steel. We think it's steel, or it could be part of the locomotive. So again, we sent off the screenshot with some dimensions on it to the Stanier Association, and they came back with a marked up engineering print showing us exactly what part of the locomotive we had. And it's one of the main frames that would have carried the axles and the wheels, and also mounted the boiler as well. So it's like one of the main chassis rails of the locomotive. And just to make it clear, I've marked in red the bit that we've got compared to the bit on the seabed. And because it's referenced, you can take the dimensions that are on here and compare it, and it's within 6 millimeters in most dimensions. So again, it's another one of those things where we've got contemporary evidence to support today's reconstruction. So we can be quite confident about any other arbitrary measurement that we take in the wreck. Mike did a reconstruction based on the engineering drawings to show just how much of that locomotive is missing. And the short answer is quite a lot. We're missing most of it. And this is true for both railway locomotives. They were very close to hold number 4, and they have been bent and ripped apart by the explosion, such as the force. And one of the sailors on HMS Carlisle, which was one of the ships guarding the anchorage, did actually report a boiler entering the water close to their ship. Now, we know where one of them is. Alex has visited it, and he's taken a few pictures to record it, and we know where that is in relation to the wreck. And I say the word, we know where it is, because the key word there is roughly. It's not georeferenced, it's not located, it's not fixed into the main site. We know it's out there, and we know its rough position, that's all. The plan when we return will be to go back and document this and add it into the wreck, either as a continuous piece of 3D modeling of the seabed to it, or as a geo-referenced standalone chunk. Depends on how far it really is from the wreck. It depends how much swimming I want to do with the camera. Now, one object inside the wreck caught our attention, and it's this. Now, it looks like an aircraft radial engine, but it's in a box, and it's not got any spark plugs, and there's no valve gear. It doesn't look like it has the form of a radial engine, but it isn't. And we ummed and ahed about this, and in the end I showed a friend of mine, Graham Knott, this, and he said, oh, I've seen that before on another ship in the English Channel, and it's a refrigeration unit, and that's what it is. This is a refrigeration compressor. The compressor, there's another view of it here, lies right next to the cold store. Now, the cold store is on the builder's plans, and it's right underneath the saloon room, and which is just here. So this is part of the ship's fittings. It's not part of the cargo. It's fallen off, and it's now lying on top of one of the lorries that's probably got another 3 motorbikes under this debris pile somewhere. But that's what it is. And because of its location, we're pretty confident that that's the compressor for the cold store. There is, just out of sight, a chiller unit as well, a heat exchanger. But as I said at the beginning, we don't know it all, not by a long way. And these things are one of 2 mystery objects we have. There are a lot of them. They're in the lower deck at the bow of hold number 1. They have a square section one end and a cylindrical section the other. They're about 800 millimeters long, and they've got this unusual cylindrical tube that comes off them. And there are lots of them. There's 65, I think I've counted. Some of them are buried in the silt or in the rubble. Some of them are exposed, and you can see their form. It looks like a gearbox from a vehicle, but why would you have 65 of them? It seems quite a high number. There's no internals, no gears, no shafts sticking in or out. It just doesn't look like anything we can recognize. One Egyptian guide said, well, it's obvious what it is. Okay, go on then. Well, the British love tea. It's a tea urn. Well, somebody actually came up with a suggestion last week, if you're on the call, thank you very much, of it's a field cooker. And it was a close match, but the field cooker offered up as evidence wasn't quite a perfect match. So it's that kind of lateral thinking we need to resolve this one, to get a fix on it. Nobody has been able to identify it, and we would love to know what these things are. All suggestions more than welcome. The other mystery object is hold number 2 on the lower deck again, and there are 3 of these on each side of the partition that separates the forward end of hold 2. They are like a square section rectangular unit with big rivets, and at the top there's like a filter with some rubber seal or whatever, we don't know. Water purification perhaps. There are water bowsers on the ship, so it could be part of that, but we don't know. It's another one of those unknown mysteries. Again, any and all suggestions on this would be most welcome. Somebody out there will know. Hold number 4 that we've looked at, or hold numbers 4 and 5, in fact. Let's go and have a look at the main author photo for that, because that's much more interesting. So if we just wander along, there we go, have a look. So hold number 4 is destroyed, has been destroyed by the explosion. This shaft here, should anyone wonder, is the prop shaft. If we do actually zoom in, again, you can see evidence of wasting here, and that's where they're tying off with mooring lines, and it's wearing the shaft out. But on the outside the hold area, we've got a lot of things of interest: linear shapes, engines, axles, probably a vehicle here. I think we looked at that last week. But also we've got ammunition and another vehicle axle this side. There's a cross beam from the ship structure. There's another cross beam here. Whatever blew up in that hold did a huge job. It's quite catastrophic, and I've seen a few things that have exploded, but nothing quite like this. We would like to get a reconstruction and a simulation to figure out the kind of force required, and therefore the likely source of explosion that destroyed this. It was carrying a lot of ammunition. You can see there's the 15-inch shells here. There's more ammunition here. We look over here, there are boxes and boxes and boxes of ammunition. All of this, I would suggest, don't touch. It's been down there a long time. It doesn't like being disturbed. If we look in hold number, actually just looking this one, because I think this should be a better one. Let's have a look. Yeah, so what I've done is taken a different view of the wreck, and just like the anchor, changed the angle of view and generated another ortho mosaic. We can see that this was once a rectangular hold opening, and it's been deformed, bent, stretched to such an extent that it's no longer a rectangle. If we zoom in, we can start to see lots and lots of things in here. This looks like an aircraft tyre. We haven't identified that yet positively, but it's got a smooth surface. There's no tread. There's lots of vehicle parts. There is more ammunition. You can see there's a box of 4 shells here. There's another box of 4 shells here. And then you can see these parts here. We think this hold number 5 was carrying trailers. There's another trailer here, and it's got quite a distinctive torsion bar suspension. And we think they're what's called Brockhouse trailers. They're actually a trade name, but they've got this distinctive torsion bar arm. And there is, doesn't extend that far, but there's another one of these on the seabed that we've identified as potential for being a Brockhouse trailer. But the amount of ammunition, again, you can see all of these are boxes and boxes boxes of ammunition, and some different, looks like cylindrical ammunition packed here. Not sure, needs more research. Needs to go back and have another look. There's a lot going on here, even to the point that someone has cleaned the base of one of the shells. From that, I think that one's dated 1927. Again, I really don't recommend cleaning this stuff up, but if it's cleaned, we'll gratefully read it. So that was it, old number 5. That's we've taken a look at. There's a lot going on here. There's more research to do, for sure. This object here caught my eye. It looked like a little trailer. Looked like it's got wheels on it. Looks like sort of like a, I don't know, a workshop trailer that you might put engines or gearboxes on before the advent of a forklift. Alex was going back to the Red Sea, and I gave him a wish list, basically. I said, could you go and photograph this? Could you take a picture of that? And good to his word, he did. And that's a photograph looking forward now of the trailer, the little hand cart trailer type thing that we found there in hold number 5. This is again hold number 5. That's the cleaned up brass shell, and there's the brass shell. It's actually, I can see that's dated 1923, not 1927. So quite a historical round there. It helped us identify precisely what ammunition was being carried. There is far too much on it to be carried by the ship. We know that they were carrying 50 rounds of 12-pounder and I think 40 rounds of 4-inch. There's more than that in the hold, so it's not ammunition for the ship. Now, everybody should recognize the Bren gun carriers, or the universal carriers as they're called. You can see there's one here. It's on its side. This is what it would have looked like in its heyday. This is another one of Alex's images of a preserved example. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4 of the road wheels, or the wheels preserved with the tracks rusted in place. There's another one here. You can see the rectangular form that's laying almost upright, and then there's another one here that is upside down. And obviously the explosion has just taken these and thrown them up into the air and put them back down again. And it's thrown one further than the rest, and it's actually pinned under the rudder. This is the remains of one of the universal carriers. I think the prop blade is actually digging into it as well. But this, for me, tells part of the story about what happened that night. The ship caught fire, it then blew up, and part of that explosion blew so much of the cargo out of hold number 4, most of it is scattered. One of them was the Bren gun carrier, and it had to have landed on the seabed before the ship sank. So the sequence of events was explosion, Bren gun carrier arrives on seabed. Shortly after, the ship comes down on top of it. As part of that history is embedded here under the stern. If you ever get down there, it's worth having a look. So that's what we learned. We did publish an iBook. It did okay. It was a labour of love, but eventually John Henderson got a couple of publishers interested in doing a paper book, a hardback, tangible book as opposed to an iBook. And this has really, again, been a bit of a labour of love amongst the 4 of us to put it together, to bring all of our knowledge in, to bring in the ortho photos, to bring in Alex's contemporary and preserved images into the story, to give a. It's called the definitive guide. The truth is, we still know there's more to learn, but at this point, it's as much as we're confident about sharing and saying. We had a strict rule that there would be no speculation, there'd be no maybes or ifs. It was either backed up with evidence, backed up with documentation, or proven somehow, or we don't know. And if we don't know, it's a mystery. We'll tell people it's a mystery, and that way we kept it. We think to be quite an authoritative work. I think it runs to 100. I can't remember. Just bear with me. Oh, look, I've got a copy here. It's 200 pages. 235 pages of the book. It was published by Dived Up. We felt they gave it the best chance of doing a good publication. They've done an excellent job with the layout. For example, here we've got the maker's nameplate on the gun. There's the gun. There's the ortho photo marked up with the positions of the objects, and right down to where do you find the holds, and marked up on the builder's Ike's reconstruction, where we're talking about on the ship as was. So it was quite a lot of work. I make no bones about that. If you're ever thinking of being an author and retiring rich, then unless you happen to strike it lucky with a blockbuster like Harry Potter, writing a book is sometimes a labour of love, and this very much was. Very enjoyable, a little bit stressful at times, but ultimately very enjoyable, very rewarding. Then we've got courses and resources. This page I have shared with BSAC as a PDF, so if we can make sure that's available. It's got links to the Thistlegorm project, to my website, to the book from Dived Up, to all of the 2D and 3D content that's available on the web. There is a page on my website that I put together at the beginning of lockdown, first time, that basically had all the content, all the 3D models, all the 2D ortho photos, so you can spend as long as you want looking at the contents of hold 3, or not hold 3, sorry, holds 1 and 2. Maybe you can answer the mystery object question, don't know. And then finally, there's a link to AccuPixel, my other website, which has got the Metashape and UIS details on it. We do offer photogrammetry training. It was born out of a tender that we won for one of the UK police forces. We were all set to deliver the course. Then COVID came along, so to keep momentum, we put the content online. So it's self-paced, it's modular. There's lots of real-world examples. It's built on not only my experience, but my business partner Jose's experience. He's a professor at Spanish University and teaches it there. So he's my go-to when things go wrong. Make no bones about that. The amount I learned from writing the course surprised me, to be honest. And we keep it up to date regularly as well. The good news as well is BSAC members do get a discount on the AccuPixel website. And if you just use BSAC member 10, we can give you a discount off Metashape and the courses. You will see that the UIS hardware for underwater GPS is available on the website as well. We can't discount that, but if there is a BSAC club out there that has an interesting project where GPS position, navigation, that kind of recording exercise would assist, I can't promise anything, but I'm open to ideas. You never know. So that just leaves me to say thank you very much indeed. It is appreciated. I'm glad everyone, so many of you have turned up. And thank you very much as well to BSAC for hosting and enabling this. It's always a pleasure, a privilege to share my work, and thank you very much for your time and attention.